It's August 3rd, 1963 at the Deep Lake Resort in northern Stevens County, Washington. 4 people are on a hike alongside a logging road situated near their campsite. A mother along with her 3 sons, aged 10, 6, and 4 respectively. As they hiked along the trail, the 10-year-old asked his mother if he could briefly check out the nearby waterfall, which he could hear from the trail. She agreed and told the middle child to stand waiting with the youngest while they took a brief look at the waterfall. However, the 6-year-old decided that instead of staying with his little brother, he would follow his sibling and his mother, leaving the 4-year-old alone on the trail. After a few minutes, they came back, but the youngest was nowhere to be seen. There were no footprints around, and not a trace left. This is the story of Bobby Pankin. Over 500 people a day participated in the 9-day search for Bobby. The search area was around 20 miles south of the Canadian border and was extremely rough terrain. Bloodhounds were called in to assist in the search. When we turned the bloodhound loose at midnight Saturday after giving him a sniff of the boy's shoe, I had no doubts that the party would be back in an hour or so with the child, said Sheriff Albert Holter. The bloodhound picked up a scent that ran for 2 miles before abruptly stopping at a fork in the road. The bloodhound would follow this scent twice, which put the distance at 4.5 miles. And according to the sheriff, this led them to believe that Bobby walked to the spot, turned around, and then walked back, confusing the bloodhound. Later, German shepherds from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and 2 bloodhounds flown in from Seattle also tried unsuccessfully to track the missing boy. All Bobby was wearing were blue swim trunks. The scrub brush and terrain were sharp and difficult to walk through without the proper clothing and footwear. It's difficult to describe just how bad this terrain is. If he were to have fallen into a hole under some logs and to have been hurt, it's possible that 20 searchers could have crossed right over him, said Sheriff Holter. Divers of the Stevens County Scuba Patrol of Colville searched Deep Lake while searchers scoured along Current Creek. Paula Holter Marin was just 2 years older than Bobby Pankin when the 4-year-old Spokane boy disappeared in 1963. She still remembers how frustrated her father, the late Stevens County Sheriff Albert Dutch Holter, was that he couldn't find the child despite what may have been the largest search in the county's history. He really felt they should be able to find out what happened, Paula said. Paula said her father tried everything he could think of, including getting a child's perspective. He took Paula and her 10-year-old sister Michelle to the spot where Bobby was last seen and asked them where they would have gone if they had wandered off. Volunteers poured in from both sides of the international border. Residents of Northport, 15 miles northwest of the lake, opened their kitchens to feed the searchers. Campers abandoned their vacations and loggers left work to join sheriff deputies, Forest Service employees, and National Guardsmen in combing the woods. Riders on horseback scoured areas favored by bears, while boaters and divers probed the 2-mile-long Deep Lake. Cougar and bear hunters applied their skills, and the Stevens County Air Posse conducted an aerial search. Holter didn't rule out the improbable possibility that an eagle could have snatched the 30-pound boy, and nesting areas along Republican Creek also were examined. The official search didn't end until the following Sunday, August 11th. Holter later estimated that 4,000 people tried to find Bobby. He was open to the possibility that Bobby had been abducted, but considered that highly unlikely in view of the remote location and the short time the boy was left alone. Eventually, the official search for Bobby was called off when not a single clue was uncovered. His parents, Edna and Howard, would return to their home in Spokane, but a number of locals living in the area would continue their personal search for Bobby. Sheriff Holter considered that Bobby, who weighed just 30 pounds, was snatched by an eagle, or even taken by a bear or wildcat. However, he said this was unlikely, due to the fact that Bobby would have called out and there would probably have been evidence of some kind of commotion. Bobby Pankin's disappearance predates the 1981 formation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The center has no information on the case, nor does the Washington State Patrol's Missing and Unidentified Persons Unit or the Missing Children Society of Canada. Lucy Stewart, manager of the WSP unit, and Ted Davis, an investigator for the Canadian Society, said child abductions by strangers are rare. Cases of abducted children growing up with strangers, unaware of their past, are rarer still. I think it's certainly a possibility, but there are not a lot of documented cases out there that I'm aware of, Stewart said. Davis, however, said there are quite a few unexplained disappearances, including 42 reported in Canada since 1984. A March 10, 1964 letter from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said the Bureau has maintained close liaison with local authorities and no evidence has been developed indicating a kidnapping had occurred. Thankfully, the family remained intact. Jim, the 6-year-old all those years ago, launched a firefighting career with the State Department of Natural Resources. Bill, the 10-year-old back in 1963, did a hitch in the Army and since then has worked on automated control systems for Denver Metro Wastewater for 20 years and now the Amgen Biotechnology Company. Ted, another brother who had decided to go fishing with his dad the fateful day of Bobby's disappearance, earned a business degree from Gonzaga University and served 12 years as an Army officer. He's now a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve and an Army civilian contractor at Fort Hood. Jim feels he may have been too protective of his daughter at times, but Bill says his children enjoyed the same freedom he had as a child. Ted is a bachelor. As he's grown older, Ted said he wonders more frequently what happened to Bobby. Is he alive? And what's he doing? The odds may be against it, but Ted doesn't rule out the possibility that Bobby grew up with another family and forgot his early childhood. It's a better memory to think of it like that, he said. Spokane County Fire District 9, Captain Jim Pankin was 6 when Bobby disappeared. Now 53, he carries vivid memories of that day. I left my little brother, he said. Now let's go to my thoughts. As stated by the FBI and the sheriff, it's unlikely that the boy was kidnapped, as he should have been heard, and there would have been more evidence of a struggle. Actually, there was hardly any evidence at all. But in all fairness, they were near a waterfall of some sort, so that easily could have washed out the sound of screaming or yelling, as horrible a thought as that is, without much difficulty, depending on how big the waterfall was and how close they were to it. I find it interesting that it seems he doubled back. A kidnapper, I would think, wouldn't do that unless the threat of being tracked was something the kidnapper thought of and purposely did to confuse the dogs. Did Bobby walk off on his own and actually get lost? I would think he would have been found, though, if that were the case, but who knows? I have to say, it sounds like the community did a wonderful job searching for this boy, and they should be commended for all the work they did. They did a very thorough job, and it's nice to see that hunters were involved in the search. Being a hunter, I find that it's an interesting viewpoint you have compared to some others who don't have the history that you have, searching for things. Only hunters would really understand what I mean by that statement. But to sum it up, basically hunters are taught to take everything in around them. Hunters can notice small details, things that are hidden, a lot better than most people can without any hunting experience. It's certainly something you can learn, but it's nice to see that people who are hunters were involved in the search. And it's nice to see that so many people from the community were so involved with this, trying to find this little boy. It's terribly sad that he even went missing, but I'm glad to know that the community came together to help him. It's always encouraging to see that. If you can take nothing else away from this, it's nice to see that the community came together to try and find someone. Now, I cannot speculate much about the possibilities of who might have taken Bobby, because I do feel that something happened. I don't feel like he just walked off. It does seem like he might have walked off initially, but after it seems he doubled back, it seems like something happened to him that was out of his control. And I can't really explain it, but it just seems like somebody had to have taken him. I don't see him going off into the rough brush where he would have gotten scraped and cut, deliberately going through that area or falling into a hole that wasn't easily seen. Everyone would have walked over the same spots he was over, which means they had an equal opportunity of falling into a hole. And any hole along the logging roads would have been easily seen. So I don't see how he could have just fallen through a hole in the ground. I also don't see how he could have been taken by any kind of bird unless it was some of those, thunderbirds, which I honestly don't believe exist, but that is my personal opinion. But if he was, again, they searched all the areas they could think of where birds nest, and they were up in the air looking around. I would think, personally, that they would have seen something. So, there's a lot of theories that go around on this. As far as people go, I really hope they looked into any offenders in the area to see if they had an alibi. It seems likely that they would, but I don't know if they did. but I have a hard time really telling you what could have done this. Now, there is one theory that does make at least a certain amount of sense. And I want to be very clear here. This is just a theory, so take it with a grain of salt. But it seems like if this was somebody that was on the ground, they would have to be able to sneak up on the boy without making a sound, pick him up off the ground so none of his clothing gets ripped off, and be able to maintain complete self, silently watching the family the entire time they were there, let alone during the hike, which is certainly possible, but not very easy to do, especially because, as I said, that terrain was very rough. It was not easy to walk around. So some believe it could have been a Sasquatch, or a Bigfoot, or a Wood Ape. And being out in the woods, it would make sense that Bigfoot would be there naturally. Now, I want to make two disclaimers. As far as I go, I'm not an expert on biology nor Bigfoot, and in all honesty, no one really is an expert when it comes to Bigfoot research. Unless we get someone living with a group of Sasquatch and documenting every behavior and idiosyncrasy of the individuals in the group as a whole, much like Jane Goodall did with chimpanzees, no one really knows much about Bigfoot. So some may say that they are complete pacifists, and some say that they are absolutely terrifying creatures. Really, I don't think anyone knows. At least not for sure. If they are basing their opinion off of their own sightings, then they also need to take into the account that there are plenty of other people who have had their own sightings as well, but do not agree with them. So it's very intriguing, to say the least, to see all the differences in behavior for these creatures that are reported. But you do have to keep in mind that if you are listening to someone's account, that they are not only telling you the truth, which is unfortunate, but you do have to assume that people might be lying to you, but you're also assuming that they are telling you the way it actually happened. They aren't interpreting it. So, you do have to take everything you hear with a grain of salt again. And secondly, this theory obviously assumes that Bigfoot exists. I know many people have their own theories about its existence or are super skeptical, and all I share here is just a theory. But Bigfoot was known in native cultures to carry off people, especially women and children, so it does fit, at least to a degree. By far the most well-known and talked about alleged Bigfoot kidnapping, as well as one of the strangest, concerns the Canadian prospector and lumberjack Albert Osman. In 1924, Osman went on vacation to the rugged wilderness near Toba Inlet, British Columbia, Canada. One of his purposes at the time was to try and find what he claimed to be a long-lost gold mine that he was convinced it existed out there in the dense forests. While on his journey into these remote badlands, Osman's Indian guide told him that the man who had allegedly originally found the lost gold mine was rumored to have been killed by a Sasquatch, which was, according to Osman, the first time he had ever heard of such creatures, despite having long been a hardened outdoorsman. The Indian explained about the large, hairy, man-like beasts they called Sasquatch and told about the large footprints they left behind. But Osman at the time did not believe a word of it, instead chalking it up to be some crazy old native legend. Not long after this, the two made camp, and Osman headed out on his own, with some supplies in a pack and armed with his rifle and a knife to investigate a pass through the mountains that he had seen, as well as do some prospecting. After a few days of camping alone out in the wilderness, some rather odd things were noticed by Osman. One morning he found that some of the items in his camp had been moved around, although nothing had been taken, and Osman slept that night with his rifle within easy reach, thinking that perhaps a porcupine or another animal had come through and picked through his camp. The following morning, though, he found his backpack had been emptied out, and was still oddly hanging from where he had left it. This time some things were missing, such as a half-pound pack of prunes and all his pancake flour. The only thing that hadn't been touched was his bag of salt. Now, as a hunter, I know that if you want to seed an area, it's common in many places at least to take salt blocks and put them around in an area to attract game to your location. Or what you will do if you are a wildlife photographer or a hunter is you will take those blocks and you will place them in front of a trail camera to see what kind of animals are in your area. If you have elk will come by and they'll lick the salt block and you can see them. But generally speaking, most animals out there love salt. It's one of the few things they do not get much of out there. Most plants in the wilderness do not contain much salt, which is why moose are known to dive into lakes and ponds. That is where the most salt-filled plants are. So it's strange to me that the bag of salt was not touched. But anyway, an examination of the camp turned up no footprints, and the intrusion did not seem to be the work of animals since nothing had been torn apart or haphazardly ransacked or strewn about. For 3 nights in a row, the mysterious intruder visited the camp unseen, and all efforts by Osman to stake out the camp to find the trespasser in the act were to no avail. On the 4th night of these strange incidences, Osman went to bed fully clothed with both his knife and rifle within easy reach, and this time he had intended to stay awake all night in order to catch the trespasser. But he eventually fell into a deep sleep. At some point he claims he was awoken by something picking him up, sleeping bag and all, and he groggily thought it might be a snowslide, although there was no snow in the area at the time. He said he felt as if he had been put on horseback, and that whatever was carrying him was walking. He couldn't see anything as he was wrapped up in his sleeping bag, and he desperately grabbed for his rifle as he tried to figure out who or what was carrying him along. Unable to move, and with various equipment sticking into him uncomfortably, Osman could only wait there in the encroaching dark and see where he was being taken. Whatever had captured him seemed to be taking Osman uphill, as he could feel each step lifting upwards, and he began to notice that the thing was breathing heavily, as well as occasionally letting out coughing noises and strange chattering sounds. For 3 hours, Osman was carried like this through the wilderness, when suddenly his sleeping bag was dumped onto the ground and he warily peeked outside. Although it was too dark at the time for him to clearly see what was out there, he could vaguely make out large, dark shapes and hear what sounded like several large creatures chattering unintelligibly amongst each other. And it seemed to be a family of the very hairy humanoids his old Indian guide had told him about. Osman called out to find what the creatures wanted, and he was answered with more of the chattering sounds. He thought of escape, but his legs were too badly cramped and painful for him to even walk, let alone run away. Interestingly, in a more modern account, one 19-year-old woman named Oksana Tereletskaya was apparently kidnapped by a hairy wild man after she had become lost in the wilderness. As she stopped to pick some raspberries to eat, the young woman claimed that she had heard a chuffing noise and looked to see a strange creature that looked like an orangutan. She apparently screamed and passed out, after which she came to in a cave with the sounds of a stream nearby and rays of light piercing down through the darkness from above. The strange ape-like creature was sitting next to her, with its teeth bared in a mockery of a smile. It then reportedly set upon her to rip her clothes off, after which she lost consciousness once again. When she awoke again, she realized that she was imprisoned, and that she had become the, quote, wife, end quote, of the creature.
Monkey with massive testicles!
Whenever it left the cave, it would roll an immense, heavy boulder across the entrance of the cave to prevent her escape, and would typically return with berries or raw meat for her to eat. One day in spring, the creature left the cave in an errand, and this time did not close the boulder as tightly as usual. Oksana was able to squeeze her way through the opening and make it outside, where she made a daring escape. When she made her way back to civilization, she realized that she had been held captive for about a year. Mentally unbalanced by the whole ordeal, unable to fully adjust to normal life, she was admitted to a mental hospital, where she relayed her amazing story to her doctor. Unfortunately, when no one would believe her, Oksana allegedly fell into a deep depression, and then began telling people that the creature knew where she was and would come back for her. One day, she apparently just suddenly disappeared from her room, and other patients would purportedly claim that a large, hairy beast had come to get her during the night. It's unclear just how much of the story is true, but it is intriguing nevertheless. One story I recommend listening to, whether you believe in Bigfoot or not, is an episode just recently made by the channel Buckeye Bigfoot. She does a really good job narrating people's stories. And the story of one man in Alberta, I believe, was really interesting. For a number of reasons, reminded me of his case. I will link the video down below and at the end of this video so you can check it out, but I highly recommend it. And of course, with both cases, I had to omit a lot of details just simply because they didn't quite apply to the video, and it would take too long to relay them. I want to keep this story focused on Bobby. There are dozens, if not more, cases of children being carried along by what is described as a bear man, basically a Bigfoot, because a lot of these children are 2 years old, 4 years old, like Bobby, right? Young kids. They don't have a large vocabulary, so they use what they can understand best. As I said, some people do believe that Bigfoot was the perpetrator of this child's disappearance, and you can certainly see why. No evidence was left, and No clothing was torn off. There was no real insights that anyone could come to, even though there were thousands of people searching and there were obvious experts out in the field looking with knowledge on what to look for if it were a kidnapping. And yet nothing has shown up. So you can definitely see where people are coming from with this theory. And again, I'm not even really sure how I feel about it, but I can certainly see it being true. But I don't know. I want you to please let me know what you think. But I do want to be clear. I am in no way disregarding what happened to Bobby or the rest of the Pankin family. My heart goes out to them for their loss. No matter how much time goes by, that never really leaves you. So I really want to be very clear about that. And I want to give a shout out to David Politis for all the work he's done compiling and researching what has happened to thousands of people, giving those who are lost a voice. And I want to give a big thanks to all these articles, websites, and resources that allowed me to make this video as accurate as possible. And thank you for watching to the end. Please feel free to let me know what you think, but remember to keep the comment section friendly, and try not to get too bogged down with theories. It can be very easy to run away with them, and they can get away from you. And if you don't agree with somebody's theory, it's probably best if you keep that to yourself. Otherwise, we will have an absolute comment war, and I will have to either delete comments or limit comments, and I do not want that. But anyway, if you have any experiences that you'd like for me to share on the channel, please feel free to email me at idahobigfootchannel@gmail.com. And remember to like this video, subscribe for more content, and share this video wherever you'd like by clicking the share button down below and copying the link. It really helps. Thank you all, and I'll see you next time. Bye.